Okay, here we are, and we're trying to get my computer to behave because it keeps shutting down in the middle of what I'm trying to say to you. Um, I'm George Chernowski, as you probably would have guessed, and we'll be gliding our way through this semester together. First of all, let me say your essays for the first week were terrific. Yeah, by and large, they were really well done. There were a few that needed more detail, and I wrote in the comments in my response that you needed more detail. So if I wrote that in yours, then make sure that you put in more detail, okay? Because that's part of why I comment, is to tell you how you can make it better. So far, so good. As for your comments on each other's works, a lot of them were very good, very positive, and that's all great. But don't be afraid to disagree with somebody. Don't be afraid, I don't think I agree with what you said. Don't be afraid of that. That makes it all more fun for us. So keep on doing that, okay? Go be more willing to say, I don't think you were right. I don't think I didn't read it the same way you did, and I don't know if you read it right. So be willing to do that kind of thing, because that makes it more fun for everybody. Okay. Now on to a rose for Emily, and the computer is giving me lots of trouble tonight, but let's keep going and see if this will work for us. Okay. When you read a rose for Emily, keep in mind that it is not set in chronological order. Actually, the very first thing you read in the story takes place at the end of the story. So the chronology is very different from what's actually happening, okay? Don't let that throw you too much. In fact, I'm going to suggest that maybe you make a timeline for yourself, and on this timeline, write things down, and then try to figure out where they happened, because the first thing you read in the story almost is really almost the very end of the story, and then you go back here and here and here and read different parts. It bounces around a lot, okay? Don't be confused by that, okay? So make sure that you do that. Make sure that you get your head on as to the way the plot is set up, because this week is all about plot, which is a series of interrelated actions. And part of your job in reading this story is figuring out how all of these actions are interrelated and how it all comes together into one real story. So again, put it in your head that you kind of start at the end, and then you go back to different times, you hop around to the different time periods. Things happen. They didn't necessarily happen in the order you will read them, okay? But the whole thing ultimately works out to a very gripping, very good story. I'll try to go on a little more. If this is as far as my computer takes me, so be it. I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in this work. Miss Emily is a representation of the Old South. She comes from a Southern genteel family, a family with some money, and the money is kind of gone. Her father was an overprotective guy who didn't want to let her go. You'll see that in the story. Okay, so that's part of it. Miss Emily has a servant man that works for him. Miss Emily falls in love with a guy named Homer Barron. And when you read about Homer Barron in there, read that very carefully, because that may give you an insight into why Homer Barron's relationship with Emily didn't work out the way that one might hope it did. So read that slowly, read that carefully. Pay attention to what you're reading, okay? Faulkner creates characters that show the world that he came from, as most authors do. Faulkner is a guy who wrote at the time the Old South was fading away, and we're talking about roughly 1900, a little bit before that, post-Civil War and before World War I. The Old South is fading. but people who were part of the moneyed families in the Old South didn't want to let go of their of what their families had been. Okay, so Emily comes from a kind of a highfalutin family. It's no longer a highfalutin family, and you'll see that in the description of her house. Take that all into account as you are reading the story, that Emily's life is changing, and she doesn't want it to change. She wants life to be the way it was way back when she was a kid, when her father was somebody important and such. Don't get too hung up by that whole tax thing. The Colonel, if you read it carefully, it will tell you Colonel Sartoris made up that story about Emily's father lending money to the town. He made it up so that people wouldn't press Miss Emily for money, because Colonel Sartoris knew that Emily's father had come from money and had been part of the establishment, and he didn't want to cast any kind of dishonor, shame on the daughter. Okay, so be aware of all of that as you read. Faulkner uses words very carefully, very judiciously. Again, that doesn't mean read it like it's science. It is a novel. It is a short story. It's not a novel. It's a short story. So it's fiction. But there's a lot of points to pay attention to in this story. I give you some hints in here. And when it comes to writing, oh my goodness, you could have a ton of things to write about in here. Basically, the whole thing we're talking about is plot structure, series of interrelated actions. And in this story, you have to figure out how all of these actions interrelate into a story that is unified. Okay? That's really what your job is. But there are so many other things going on in the story. You might go in a whole lot of different directions, and that's okay. Okay? So have fun with this story. Have a good week. I look forward to seeing your essays posted. Don't be afraid to post them early. If I get them on Tuesday or Wednesday, that's good. That gives me a head start for the weekend. And, if they show up on Friday, well, so be it. Okay? So you guys have a good week. Questions, contact me. You know how to do that. And I look forward to next weekend. Take care.